Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. So we are back again with another lore summary for the Psychic Awakening, and this time it is the latest book, Engine War. I want to say a massive shout out to Shaskais once again for providing this text. Without him, without his dedication for doing this, these videos would not be possible. So a massive thank you. Please everyone go to the link in the description, go and praise him like he is the Emperor Reborn. Now let's jump in and let's get down to the new lore. So the introduction to this book: the Imperium's armies are vast, but they cannot be everywhere. Despite all their courage and determination, the overstretched Imperial armies struggle to defend their realm. This resulted in an increasing number of systems and regions being isolated or abandoned by the Imperium. In such places, the enemies of mankind grow in power. One such world is Ordex Thag, a forge world that was severed from Martian rule centuries ago and now rests in the hands of heretics and their Chaos Knight allies. These heretics are harnessing psychic emissions from the Great Rift in order to manifest yet another warp rift into the Imperium. A small group of Admech arrived at Ordex Thag with the intent to test the horrifying technology on the heretics of the planet. Alongside them came the chivalrous Imperial Knights that were drawn to the planet by a prophecy. Both factions want to see the heretics plot ended at any cost. So this book also covers Mars's reaction to the Great Rift as well. So the Admech of Mars basically felt that their influence was dropping throughout the galaxy with the Great Rift taking place. They were gripped by fear over the possible loss of valuable resources and holy technology, but what they feared the most was the threat of succession. Indeed, the outposts whose loyalty to Mars already was tedious used their isolation as a chance to declare their independence. Of course, faced with this threat, Mars acted as Mars would. They reassigned their explorer fleets into reclamation fleets and sent them out to the wider galaxy. Many Forge worlds sent their own reclamation fleets, but none could match the scope or scale of Mars's fleets. Now, Shaskais has broke the story down into 5 parts, so that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be covering each part. I'll tell you when we go into the next part. So we're going to start with part 1. And part 1 starts with Magus Exu Kol, and he is the commander of one of the 3 Martian reclamation fleets sent into the Segmentum Tempestus. Despite Kroll's fleet having the navigators from the finest navigator houses, it made slow progress. The fleet kept getting buffeted by warp storms as they travelled from one world to the next. Every ship in the fleet suffered losses to its navigators and astral choirs. In their journey, the fleet made contact with many of the Admech's worlds. In every single one, they witnessed the Great Rift's psychic corruption. Data demons, scrap code entities, living diseases, and other horrors beset those worlds, laying waste to the machine gods faithful and destroying their techno treasures of Mars. Many of the Magi could not process the horrors they witnessed, so blinded by the loss of irreplaceable artifacts that they declared the Psychic Awakening occurrences as impossibilities, even as their optics watched them unfold. Other Magi went insane trying to document the unnatural powers that manifested. The interests of Mars suffered and demanded action. An anti-psychic fever swept the reclamation fleets against the psychic onslaught of the Great Rift. Nothing can be spared. The resources of entire systems, ancient technologies, unstable weapons, all were expended to preserve the power of Mars. So vital were the Forge worlds to the Imperium that the reclamation fleets rarely quested alone. They joined with various forces of the Imperium. Kroll's fleet was joined by a Knight of the Pandar March, a witchcraft-hating coalition of Imperial Knights from many houses led by Baroness Sorden of House Terran. Curiously, despite her hatred of sorcerer, the Baroness kept a quartet of soothsayers and fate readers. Kroll and his Magi viewed an unearthed pit captured of a devastated industrial world. They saw Chaos Knights breaking the fortifications that held the Tithe Psychotive before herding them aboard mass conveyors. Many of the Chaos Knights bore the serpent badge of House Lucarus. That was part 1. We are now moving on to part 2. So this states Ordex Thag was a minor forge world in the Solitex sector that was overrun by orcs in 633.m421. The orcs eventually moved on. However, the Admech could not resettle the planet due to the increased attacks from other Xenos threats and chaos. Had the Admech knew what transpired on what they thought was an abandoned forge world and how it was connected to the Warp Storm Siren Storm, nothing would have held back their wrath. The truth of the Ordex system is that it laid beneath the banner of the Chaos Knights of House Lucarus. Their leader, Magnate Warsuk, was fueled by an excessive hatred for terror. So when the Dark Mech approached him with the most intriguing offer relating to his obsession, he heard them out. Knowing that he would be a fool to completely trust them, he placed contingencies in case of their betrayal. But if half their claims came true, he and his house would get everything they wanted, and more. The Dark Mech began their work. They used their demon engines to drill straight into the planet's core, where they installed massive demon torturing machines and then bound demons to these engines using agonizing runic chains. The psychomasses delivered by the Chaos Knights were used as fuel to keep the torture machines going. The power generated by the hate and torment of the demons acted as a hook on the veil that separated reality from the warp. As the planet rotated around its star, the spindle of demon agony span and tightened, hooking Siren Storm and pulling it, causing the warp breach to rupture further. In the path of this warp rift advance, there were many worlds including some of the greatest southern defences of the Imperium, yet they were mere collateral damage compared to the true target. The Dark Mech claimed that they could twist this warp rift around the system before sending it towards Terra and its corpse Emperor. Among the dark devices constructed by the Dark Mech for this task was the Resonator Spire that magnified the demonic psychic howls. This device was built from stolen Imperial technology, and it was its signal that drew Crawl's fleet to Ordex Thag. Seeing a fallen forge world consumed by techno-heresy, Crawl resolved to go to war. The casualties will be heavy, the Holy Knight suits will be put at risk, but the Omnissiah was with him, and also the Valerian device. Now, that was the end of part 2, and we're now moving on to part 3. So this says, Crawl and his Magi belonged to a secretive subcult of the Admech called the Teeth of the Cog. This subcult abhorred all forms of Psyker as a dire threat to the Admech. They were absolutionists in their belief and viewed even the Imperial Psyker forms as a revulsion. This was the reason of their secrecy of Mars jealously guarded its contracts of fabrication with the psychic institutions of the Imperium. Crawl underlined his battle plan for the fleet's commanders. He revealed the Valerian device and explained its function by telling them that its complex detonator would such unleash a powerful null pulse that it would suppress and extinguish the psychic powers of the traitors. Successful deployment of the device would be a victory for the Martian cold logic over the sorcery of the warp. Having witnessed and suffered the horrors of the psychic power in their journey, the Reclamation Fleet commanders overrode their passionless detachment with binary calls for war. In truth, Crawl was not certain from where the device came from, nor does he fully understand its function or its effects. The device was brought to the Teeth of the Cog by a shadowy tech priest that somehow divined their existence of their secretive subcult. He gave no noospheric data and spoke with a vox emitter. As he spoke, tiny insectal servitors scurried amongst his robes. He told them that he came on behalf of his masters, and that he congratulates the Teeth of the Cog for their insight regarding the need to stamp out the corruptive influence of psychic power for the good of the Imperium and the galaxy. The fleet's forces and their knights' allies descended on the planet and went for the greatest chaos citadel on the planet. Despite all their arcane weaponry and battle algorithms, the Admech forces were overwhelmed by the warp-powered might of the heretics and chaos knights. Rains of mutations from the high maze-like walls of the citadel kept ravaging the Skitarii forces, even as they were smashed and torn apart by berserker chaos knights. Even the gargoyles that decorated the battlements came to life and swept down to vomit fire on the Admech warriors or render them with stone claws. Seeing his forces getting isolated and torn apart, Crawl became desperate. The Admech forces failed to get the device to its prime location, and time had run out. After leaving the device to his remaining servitors, Crawl took most of his cabal, Manipul, and made his escape. As he fought his way out the slaughter, he sent the remote signal to activate the device. Now that was the end of part 3, and we're moving on to part 4 with, meanwhile, as Kroll's forces were being routed, the Baroness split the Knight forces in two. Based on visions of her soothsayers, both the Citadel and the Resonator Spire must fall to stop the traitor plans. The majority of the Knights assailed the Citadel, while a group of Knights would be charged with toppling the Spire. The Knight group marched towards the Spire. The demons of the warps decided to act, for they loathed to see Magot's Warsic's plan cut short. The Knights were surrounded by sickly light that span and darkened into misty vapour of the cover of bile. Within the vapour, shadowy figures began to manifest and emerge. The Knights beheld the demons in horror and outrage. Never had they faced such unholy evil. In their minds, the warnings of the imprinted spirits of the throne's Mechanicus bled, as a former pilots revelled in the horrors of the old Knight. Driven by disgust and hatred, the Knights fought through the demon tide until they neared the Spire. Their advance was met by the manifestation of a duo of greater demons, a bloodthirster and a keeper of secrets. A Knight had its chassis rent by an axe swing of the bloodthirster. The demonic axe missed her mortal frame by a few inches. In return, the Knight plunged her Reaper chainsword into the greater demon's head, obliterating it. Her shout of victory was short-lived, as fury swarmed into the chassis opening and tore her apart. One of the surviving Knights charged towards the Spire, but he was pounded by the Keeper of Secrets and damaged. The Knight struggled to fight off the greater demon, but fortunately for him, one of his comrades, a flea blade, emerged from the mist to barrel into the demon. The demon was quick enough to strike down its assailant, burying its claws into him, but it was too slow to withdraw its claw. The free blade collapsed on the demon, pinning it down. This allowed the wounded Knight the opportunity he needed to complete his charge towards the Spire, striking it with its thunderstruck gauntlet and tearing out the device that powered it. What resulted was a warp storm implosion and the aftershock that blasted across the battlefield and banished the demons. The Knights' offensive against the Citadel proved to be unsuccessful as their Admech allies' efforts. The traitors were too entrenched and numerous. The Baroness could not ignore the mounting losses. She yearned to take as many enemies as possible, but she was responsible for the lives of her fellow Knights, so she angrily ordered a retreat. As she and her Knights were pursued by Chaos Knights, she spotted the defeated and routed forces of the Admech, making their own retreat. Then suddenly, an explosion erupted from the area where the Admech had fought. An expanding shell of energy enveloped the Chaos Citadel and raced towards the warring forces. Some of the Skitarian servitors struck by the null field slowed and then froze, but those clustered around the data tethers fared better. The Knights of both sides suffered the most. Within the throne's Mechanicum, the imprinted ghosts screamed as they were stripped away, the feedback slaying their pilots. Several Knights collapsed as their pirate souls were torn apart. The null field quickly dissipated, and the surviving Imperial Knights managed to escape their now reeling pursuers. The Baroness thanked the Emperor that somehow her Knights had weathered the null explosion better than the traitors. The Baroness found Kroll among the retreating Admech forces and demanded answers. The Magus Dominus rambled about a device, his triumph and acceptable losses. The Baroness realised that the explosion and the death of her companions was the Magus' doing. Reaching out with her gauntlet, she grabbed him and carried him off, all but crushing him in her grasp. Ignoring his screams and the puny fire of the Skitari, she made her way to the Knights' landing zone. And that is the end of part 4. Now we're moving on to part 5, and that starts with, as the Baroness returned to her ship with her prisoner, the tortured demonic essence held captive within the Ordex Thag core felt the premature activation of the Valerian device. The null field had broken their shackles that held them. 4 demonic entities survived to escape from their prison. For the torment of centuries, the 4 demons repaid the Dark Mech 1,000-fold. After they finished with the Dark Mech, they turned their hatred to the one they loathed above all others, Magot Warsuk, the mortal that had dared preside over them as their jailer. In a surge of violent force, the 4 demons tore their way to the world's surface. The effects of the Valerian device still saturated the ground, and most demons would have found it intolerable, yet these 4 demons were mighty. They were exalted lords of ruin, who had been worshipped as gods, had enslaved empires and ushered entire subsectors to damnation. As Warsuk regrouped his Chaos Knights, the 4 demons pounced on him and took possession of his knights, reshaping the knight into a hellish tomb of torment. The Warsuk pleaded with the demons and offered them the service of his knights, but the demons simply responded by laughing at him and then flinging him and his knights into the warp. The demons weren't yet finished with this world. The demons looked up at the fleeing conveyors of the Admech. They tracked the trail of null energy to the Admech ships. The most far-sighted of the four explained to his brothers that if these mortals are allowed to escape, then more of the fearsome null devices would appear. That could not be allowed to happen. With a thought, the four demons sped towards the Admech vessels. As they flew, they sent calls of summons into the warp. Hundreds of warp rifts manifested on the Admech ships. Demons of every type of colour poured out from the rifts, and the Admechs were overrun by a flood of horrors and corruption. On the bridge of the Admech flagship, the master of the demon host made his appearance, stabbing his talons into the shipmaster's body. The demon sent his essence into the navigational controls. From the flagship, an order bled into the other ships, as one of the Adships turned and sailed towards the fiery heart of the system's star. Epilogue. The Baroness took Magus Kroll back to her homeworld and began punishing him for what he had done, beating the bolts out of him and torturing him. But the Kroll managed to talk his way out of it. He explained to her that the device was a success. The device cut the Chaos Citadel from the warp. It was temporary, but the warp was blocked. With the right calibration, the effects can be fabricated to be permanent. This knowledge will be shared with her house. She will have the means to kill all witches. The Baroness acquiesced to this offer. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. That is the Engine War Lore Summary, the latest book in this Psychic Awakening series. Hopefully within a few weeks we'll have the next version of the Psychic Awakening story, which is of course War on the Spider, featuring Fabius Bile, Custodes, Death Guard, everything that's going to be involved in that. Very much looking forward to it. A massive shout out to Shaskais once again for providing this text. Without him, this video wouldn't be possible. Thank you for coming. Leave all your thoughts, feedback, everything like that in the comment section, and we'll have a nice little talk about it down there. See you now, have a great day, and bye bye.